anybody watching this on demand afterwards. I was very pleased when the Cybersecurity Council approached us at Cyber Wales and asked, would we be able to help support a webinar all about threat intelligence? I went, well, absolutely. It's not something that's in my wheelhouse personally, but I know exactly the right person to bring along and to speak. So very pleased to have my colleague Gareth here with me today, and we'll be going through his background and thoughts about threat intelligence as a pathway through a cybersecurity career. I would just, quick 2 minutes from me. Hi, Jules. I'm both the OT cluster manager at Cyber Wales. So I look after all things operational technology. That's my specialism. We look after industrial control systems and med tech and all those wonderful, strange things that back all of our critical national infrastructure and the like. But my day job is over at Sapphire, where I'm their OT director and look after the practice here. And Gareth is my CTO. I'm going to be here today to ask Gareth some questions, both some things that we've done a little bit of preparation for you guys to make sure this all runs nice and smoothly, but also keep an eye out for your questions as well. So I please encourage you throughout the webinar today, pop your questions into that Q&A function for me. And what I'll do is try and weave those into the conversation with Gareth to make sure that we cover all of the things that you're really interested in hearing about, as well as the bits and pieces we've already prepped. Without further ado, I'll pass over to Gareth, who's going to start by giving us a little bit of a background to how he got to where he is today and what that means in terms of threat intel. So Gareth, over to you.
See my screen, the presentation, Jules?
Yeah, all
perfect.
Good.
Okay.
All good.
Good morning, everyone. So yes, thanks for the wonderful introductions from Sonia and Jules. So just to give you kind of a bit of a run through of what we're going to cover today, as Jules said, I'm going to give you a little bit of a background as to who am I and sort of my journey to the role, because I think cyber threat intelligence is a very broad term, and actually that's really something that I'm very passionate about. And as we'll get onto later, I think there isn't just one defined pathway to that. I think cyber threat intelligence is vital for lots of roles within the cybersecurity arena. So hopefully my background and journey to where I am today is useful. Then we'll go into a little bit of what do we mean by threat intelligence. There's lots of information out there, but actually, what is it? What's it about? Why do we do it? Why is it important? What's it going to look like today and going forward? And how do competencies and skills contribute to doing that? And how could you potentially change roles into doing something more with threat intel, or actually, if you're already in the threat intel sort of community, what skills could you be developing or look at next? And then I've sort of made a slight fictitious example of a day in the life of that. We run a security operations center, so I was working with the SOC team to construct a bit of a day in the life of what it's like in the commercial TI space today, but there's lots we can go into in more detail, and some lessons I've learned over the course of my career to date, because there's been plenty of those. So without kind of further ado, so who am I? So yeah, Gareth Pritchard. I'm the Chief Technology Officer of Sapphire. From my background was in sort of science-based background. So I did a STEM degree. I did a degree in astrophysics at university. I love the subject because it helped me to develop kind of analytic thinking. But actually, I knew I didn't want to do that in terms of my long-term career. The concept of sitting inside a observatory cold, waiting to gather data, it didn't sort of fill me with joy. So I was very much looking at where could I apply that type of analytic thinking in different places. And from there, I moved into HMG, into civil service. and working in sort of the threat intelligence space. And reality of that was taking lots of technical concepts and analyzing information, analyzing data, should I say, and turning into information. And really, that was in support of sort of the UK government. But the reality of that process of analyzing data, understanding the mission of what that data is trying to address, what questions you're trying to answer, and then summarizing that information into actionable outcomes. And that really as a nub of what cyber threat intelligence is. And it has applications within defense and police operations, as well as in the commercial world. So nowadays threat intelligence has come a long way in terms of its applicability to both public and private sector organizations. And those trends, those themes, if you like, of understanding what questions you're trying to answer, understanding how to gather data that can address those questions, and then turn that into something that has an actual outcome, is really the nub of what TI is. And when we're sort of looking at this this webinar, I was keen to make sure that I don't make sort of any judgments of what people's knowledge of TI is, but I think there's lots of information out there that can be, as we'll go into, is it malware reverse engineering? Is it tracking nation states? Is it doing forensics, ransomware? Well, in truth, it's a bit of all of those things, and I'll come on to that in the next slide. And really, from my career, that sort of concept of taking a question that you're looking for the answer of and seeking to identify ways to address that, it has really sort of underpinned all of my journey from there. So from sort of civil service, moving into the commercial cyberspace, in sort of solution design, penetration testing, risk consultancy, building security operations centers, those types of things, all with the grounding of, if you understand your threat, understand what the threat actors are trying to do, the techniques that they use, the tradecraft that's current, and understand how they operate as an entity, that enables you to be in a much better place to defend against that. So, as I've sort of progressed in my career, I've basically done more of the same of that type of work with clients and internally. Outside of work, I am a human being. I don't just keep track of all of the trackers of the TI world. I do spend time trying to train my lovely dog there, playing average golf, and enjoying watching sport. And the other thing I sort of pull out there about a little bit about who I am is around kind of mental health first aid. It's a topic I'm really passionate about, and I think why I brought it out here as being relevant is the concept of being able to keep up to date with every single piece of information that ever happens in the cyber threat space is like drinking from a fire hose. That could be quite challenging to do. So, it can be impacting on people's mental health about whether they feel they can keep up to date, whether they feel that, some other piece of information that they might have missed. I think of myself being relatively well informed, but I still miss things all the time and rely on my team and the people in my community to share. And why I bring that out is I think it's an important part of the threat intelligence community, is that concept of collaboration and sharing, because we can't all individually do it all individually. We need to work together as a team. So it's a point I pull out there as a personal passion of mine, but it's sort of hopefully relevant to the topic. So that's kind of a bit of background from me, so hopefully that gives you a little bit of context of why I've been sort of asked, and I greatly appreciate the invite. So I think before we sort of go into some of that skill piece, I think it's useful for us just to clarify, what do we mean by threat intelligence? It's a very broad subject, which is great, but we need to consider what that means. So, I've sort of taken some models that are kind of out there that you can sort of do research on, but really kind of broken it into this sort of 4 boxes, with strategic at the top left, going around the clock of tactical, technical, and then operational. And I'll put that up there for people to sort of digest. But the reality of why I put this up here is that there's such a breadth of what we mean by TI, and whether that's used at a very technical level, so IOC feeds, data that goes into next generation antivirus or EDRs or SIM rules or IDS and IPS, those technical indicators of compromise, are really vital in identifying known bad things, or identifying where we've seen types of malware before. Can we see similar signatures or heuristics of how that works at a very technical level? But they're very transient in their nature. I mean, techniques change all the time. So the technical sort of TI piece, it's really for that immediate use. It's for identifying what's happening potentially on your network or your environment today, and how do you potentially identify that suspicious activity. And then when you sort of go up towards the tactical side, that evolves to the techniques and methodologies that attackers are using to achieve their outcomes. So if you look at a particular threat actor group, do they use a particular type of spear phishing campaign to target actors in certain regions? Do they target specific tactics to achieve their outcome? And that can quite easily blend into the sort of more strategic side around at a geopolitical level. What are nation states doing? What's happening in the Russia-Ukraine sort of conflict, and what's happening in other regions geopolitically, North Korea and sanctions, and how they're looking to use cybercrime to potentially bypass the impact of those sanctions. They all have impacts to how threat actors and threat tradecraft works, and importantly how you defend against that. And I guess the real reason why I pull that out is because the audience for those could be slightly different. And I think when you're looking at threat intelligence, the point of intelligence is turning the data into actionable outcome, and that actionable outcome needs to be tailored to the audience that you're speaking to. The technical stakeholders, if you like, are often systems. They're maybe the SOC team or your SIM platform, or they're some tooling that you're tweaking for some detection engineering. That's very different to maybe board level strategic or operational reporting. And so when you are sort of thinking about that in your careers, or if you're looking to get that message across in terms of threat or what we're seeing, you've got to be very mindful of the audience that you are that you're speaking to, in order to make sure that the piece of information that you're trying to get over resonates. Because there's no point in saying to a non-technical CEO that there's some malicious IP address associated with this particular piece of C2 infrastructure that's known to target this particular exploit of software inside of a machine. Because what can they do about it? They don't know. It's potentially too technical. Whereas actually, translating that into their language of, there's a threat actor out there looking to target businesses in your sector, with your type of geographical spread, or your type of data that you hold, or the type of business that you are. And these are the types of threat actors and how they work, and what we're doing about defending against them. So that translation of the what into the audience is really important. And then thinking about time. Timeliness is really important when it comes to intelligence, to threat intelligence. So that's why I've kind of put on that cross the sort of high level, low level, ongoing use, immediate use pieces, because there's no point in telling people 6 months later that there was this tradecraft that used these sets of infrastructure that has changed 4 times between when it happened to now, because the threat actors changed their posture. So timeliness is really important. So that hopefully it gives you a little bit of a background on what we sort of pull out as TI. I think the other thing to just talk about whilst we're on this section is what do we mean by the process of gathering threat intelligence? And it's a sort of it's a cyclical process, because as I said right at the start, understanding what question you're trying to answer will help you determine what data points and what information you need to answer that question. So planning and direction is, understand what you're trying to defend against, what you're trying to detect, what you're trying to, or question you're trying to answer. Then go about collecting information from as many sources as possible. You can use open source feeds, you can use commercial feeds, you can use sharing platforms like MISP or CISP. And then, getting all those data points together, you then have to process and analyze them into useful things. There's lots of potential for false positives. There's lots of potential for information that might be conflicting, especially if you then add time into it. Something true once changes over time. So being able to process, analyze, reduce those false positives so that you then have as best answer you can to the question you were setting out to do, then disseminate it. As I said in the last slide, share it with people that need to hear it in the right tone, in the right language, in the right pitch for that audience, and then take that feedback from them about whether that addressed the question and refine your cycle. So this cyclical process is something that, as I said right at the start, the world's moving very quickly. Information changes all the time. So this has to be a cyclical process. And, there's lots of tools out there. There's lots of, in the cyber world at the moment, lots of references to AI and automation, and they're all really important parts to play into this. But the role of a cyber threat analyst and a sort of an intelligence analyst is to constantly ask the questions that are helping to set that direction, to help set the collection and the processing rules, to help understand the information you have and identify where there might be gaps in order to address that fundamental question that you're trying to answer. The other thing I wanted to sort of pull up is you'll hear lots of references in terms of lots of our industry is great with sort of models and things, and you've got chains, you've got miters, you've got pyramids. Well, what are they? Well, from a perspective of a cyber threat analyst and from a threat intelligence perspective, you've got the Lockheed Martin kill chain, which tries to describe the typical steps that an attacker goes through to achieve their goal. And that was expanded with MITRE. MITRE as an organization took that sort of principle of the kill chain and expanded it to look at, from historically looking at threat actors that we see in the wild, what are some of those techniques that they're using? What are the tools that they're using to achieve the outcomes? And what procedures do they do with those tools to achieve that outcome? And then the final point is NCSC's Pyramid of Pain. I put that up there in order to just look at when we are trying to defend against attacker tradecraft, being able to touch all of those points of that pyramid makes it harder for the threat actors out there. Cybercrime is now the third largest economy in the world and one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing, because it's a business. The harder that we as defenders make it for cyber criminals to operate, the more costly that business becomes, the less likely they are to attack you. So by looking at threat intelligence as a means to help you beef up your defense, make it more costly for the attackers, by automating and leveraging tooling for the work that's there, so that it's trivial for an attacker to change their hash of a piece of malware or the IP address they use. So we have to have that automatically in part of our detection logic, but also expanding it to understanding more about the tools and techniques that they use. So that's hopefully a bit of a grounding in cyber threat intelligence. From the perspective of what sort of competencies and skills do you need to do? So I mentioned AI earlier. I asked Copilot to create me some images for some of the competencies and skills that I think are really useful for cyber threat intelligence. So hopefully this is a useful reference to what AI thinks is good. But I think the first piece is a thirst for knowledge and understanding. I think being realistic, this world that we live in from a threat intelligence perspective is constantly changing, and it will continue to change. So there needs to be that drive to understand how things work, how they can be abused from a sort of an attacker's perspective, and actually how do we defend against those threats. The next piece is collaboration. Look how happy and smiley everyone is when they do cyber threat intelligence, because we collaborate. And I think, that's I mentioned it earlier. It's impossible for everyone to know everything, and we need to rely on a community of peers to do research, to do work on a particular subject. And collaboration is a key skill that you need to be aware of, in my opinion. And when we collaborate, we can all sit around in a nice horseshoe and think of problem solving and doing lateral thinking. So I pull those three pieces out because from a sort of a competencies perspective, from a skills perspective, I think sometimes they can be sort of an afterthought in terms of that knowledge of how threat actors work, how tradecraft works, and actually being from my perspective, what I've majored on in terms of what I've looked to do in my career is to surround myself with people who know a lot more than me, and learn from them as much as possible, because this is cyber as a team sport for in many ways, and threat intelligence is no different. To give you a bit more of a sort of a detail, when you do look at the technical skill sets required, and the Cybersecurity Council has got a lot of this information on the website, which is great, and there's lots of resources out there. But to summarize, I think understanding and looking at attacker tradecraft, what's happening out in the world, gathering your own sources of information. So I use apps like Feedly and others to gather lots of sources of information that are open source, so that I can understand kind of what's going on out there. If you have sort of coding, network analysis, reverse engineering skills, they're really, really helpful, especially if you're then in maybe a SOC environment, or you're doing incident response, to understand and be able to unpick how malware works. But that's a really useful skill, but it's not the only way that you can get involved in threat intelligence. So if you don't have that, your avenues for rolling in TI aren't lost. They just help you understand and maybe go down that malware analysis route. If you've come from maybe a penetration testing background or a computer forensics background, a career in threat intelligence can be a good transition. But really, those technical skills of tracking threat actor groups, understanding how they operate, what targets they're looking at, being able to automate some of those pieces, so being familiar with the concepts of doing a manual investigation, a threat hunt, exploratory piece of intelligence gathering, and then work out how you can automate that. In the world that we operate in now, if you come from a background with sort of the ability to think about how you automate a problem, you will be very useful for people trying to analyze lots of bulk things in as easy as possible manner. But as I said, it's not just the sort of deep technical expertise, the malware analysis, the penetration testing, reverse engineering skills. There's lots of what I call non-technical skills that are really important to good sort of TI analysts. So I have a big understanding of geopolitics. There's a phrase that you might not be interested in geopolitics, but geopolitics is interested in you. And I think the reality of the situation is that cyber crime it operates within a geopolitical context. So being able to understand how that works, how the business of cybercrime and threat actors operating, how that works, can help you to. Jeff White, the author, uses a phrase, attacker empathy. If you understand how an attacker operates, it helps you understand how you can defend against them. And so that can be a useful piece. Communication skills is something I think everyone, even the best communicators, can always refine. But I think it sometimes gets lost under the guise of having to do all of the deep technical stuff. But actually, those communication skills, those problem skills, are really important. And then, because we operate in a lawful and regulated world, it's really important to understand what regulations are out there. From a commercial perspective, if you operate within a commercial SOC, then actually understanding what your obligations are as a business to defend the data, your customers' information, how you should keep your supply chains secure. They're all part of understanding the environment which you operate in. So I'm just going to take a breath.
Thank you, Gareth. I think the geopolitical side of things obviously very timely at the moment. I think NCSC have been saying something like 80% of the world's population have the opportunity to take part in a democratic election in 2024. So we're seeing obviously a huge amount around there at the moment. So here's your very timely reminder that today's the last day to register for vote in the UK. So please do remember to do that. A bit of intelligence for you there. But whilst we're here talking about technical knowledge, I've got a question from Martin in the chat here. So he's just completed his CompTIA Cybersecurity Analyst Plus qualification, just asking about kind of learning pathways, whether that's formal training, informal training. Are there any sort of specific areas that you would point to help with some of these skills, if that was something you wanted to pick up?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think as I kind of alluded to there, I think the reason why I've extracted those bullet points is that each one of those really has its own pathway, and the Security Council, as per the update right at the start, has various different pathways. If you want to go down further, more around the penetration testing or the malware and the forensic sides, they have their own. There's lots of sort of capabilities out there with things like hack the box and those kind of more technical hands-on pieces. There's also good information that the NCSE and other bodies have around the threat intelligence guidance principles. If you look at some of the books out there around like practical malware analysis, or some of the other pieces around individual pathways, they can help you to look at the skills and knowledge that you're looking to expand. If you're wanting more of that sort of generalist role or things like CISP or CISA, those types of general cybersecurity bodies of knowledge, the cyber body of knowledge, again, are useful ways of you to check off areas of specialism or areas of focus. Yeah, there's a few different pathways that you could look at depending on what really strikes your interest. But I guess the key thing for me is diversity, and I'll get on to this near the end of the slide. Diversity for me is really important in this sphere. So if you go down one pathway and you find it's not right for you, actually being able to pivot onto another is something I would actively encourage. I once worked with one of the best malware reverse engineers that had a PhD in music. So actually the backgrounds that you come from can help you with that analytic thinking. So try the ones that are of most interest to you, because I'm a big believer in, if you're interested in the subject, it'll help you get through the hard bits, the complex bits, the extra bits of study that you need to do. But if you find that when you wanting to do that in a role, it's not right for you, then there are lots of pivoting options that you can take from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Gareth. Yeah, I think, endlessly being curious is always helpful for these things. You'll always be on the lookout for that new exciting thing to move towards there. Thank you, Martin, for your question. Please do, anybody else, feel free to pop any questions that come into your head into the chat, into the Q&A function. We'll make sure to pick up on those. For the moment, Gareth, do you want to take us through a bit of a day in the life of, and we'll give people a bit of colour on what might be.
Absolutely. Just seen Dean's responded that he's done the CTIA again. That's another great example of a pathway into specifically the analysis stream. So yeah, thanks for popping that in. Okay, so as I said right at the start, I sort of I asked our security operations team to help me construct a little bit of a day in the life of it. So I apologise if someone thinks their commute is only half an hour, B, that they only have half an hour for lunch, but hopefully you can bear with me in the purposes of an example, but I wanted to kind of include it here. So here's a bit of a day in the life of a cyber threat analyst. So they get up, they're having some breakfast, they've walked the dog, they're doing a commute, there's an element here of looking at the information that's out there. As I say, I sort of check my Feedly in the morning just whilst I'm walking the dog, just to kind of see what's out there. If there's anything of interest, I dive into it. But that kind of thirst for knowledge, that what's happening in the world, what's the cyber news of the day. Then this analyst comes in and completes a handover from the night shift. So what of the customers that they're looking after, of the environments that they're looking after, what key activities have happened, what investigations are going on, if there was any sort of threat intelligence information or alarms that have gone on for things like credential dumps, or is there someone in the supply chain that's had information leaked on the dark web? Are there any sort of registrations of typo squat domains? Is there something there that might warrant a further investigation? And then this analyst has decided that based on the information they got from the night shift, it warrants looking into their environment and doing a threat hunt. So this particular cyber analyst is looking to check that hypothesis. So if you've seen some malicious activity in the handover, and they're wanting to dive into that, so they write a little bit of detection logic. They look at their SIM platform, and they've seen something that just doesn't look right. They can't quite explain it yet, but it doesn't look right. So they pull off some file from a host that's what sort of triggered the indicator of compromise, and they've started to do some malware analysis. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit of an accelerated day in the life. There's not many malware analysis that you can do exactly at 12 o'clock and finish exactly at 1 o'clock. But for the purposes of the example, you can hopefully see what it is. So that suspicious file has been identified on the host. So the analyst sort of sends off an isolation request on that host. So you don't want that piece of malware spreading until you understand whether it's benign or whether it's something that can be explained. So they isolate the host to stop it spreading further, and then begin that analysis. Look at thinking about what we said earlier in the session. Can it be actionable, relevant, and timely? What is the information you know today? Right now, what should you do about it? What are the next steps of your analysis? Then, because it's a working world, they have lunch, they up-to-date some news, and they come back afterwards to continue their analysis, to continue that kind of compromise assessment. What's happened? How did it get in? Where has it spread to, if it's been spread at all? What was that initialization vector? What was it? Was it a phishing email? Was it drive-by download? Was it some other sort of requirement? And then out of the blue at 3 o'clock, some vendor that they use within the SOC has released a critical vulnerability for a piece of software. So as well as that analysis, that you've got ongoing, there's some other information that's happened. So the reason why I put that in here is very rarely do you ever just have one thing to work on as a threat analyst. So that sort of being able to collaborate, key, but also being able to adapt to timeliness is important as well. So understand, what do you do next? Is there a patch already released? Is there some guidance you need to do? How do you roll the patch out, et cetera, et cetera? And then carry on through to the rest of the day with that malware analysis work, thinking again about actionable, relevant, and timely, so that you can then brief those key stakeholders and then hand over to night shift and go home and have a nice relaxing day. So there's hopefully it gives you a little bit of a view there of, if I think back to that that 4-box model and the wheel, some of this was taking information from systems, some of this was taking information from open source, some of this was using your own lateral thinking and problem solving to try and answer that question, working as a team in a SOC environment in this case, but it can be in others, to address and answer a particular question with a really focused result of, okay, what do I need to do today? What's the next steps? What do I hand over to the next person doing it? So hopefully you can sort of see that a little bit of in real life. And please forgive me for the slightly made up day there, but hopefully it's a useful piece of context.
100%. Thank you, Gareth. We've had a good few questions come in whilst you're walking through that. Fantastic. Thank you all. Maybe we'll tackle some of these now. So one here asking, if you were looking for a course and guidance for a non-technical, non-specialist looking to act really as that translator between large multi-stakeholder public sector organizations, non-technical SMEs, being able to really explain, these concepts to them. Any guidance there around something that people could get into in terms of training to become that translator role to help, put these technical concepts into easy to understand formats?
That's a really good question, and I actually think doing presentation courses or doing presenting material is really useful. There are various different principles that you try to do. The one that I see work very well is trying to tell a story. So people like analogies, they like storytelling, where you have potentially a hero and a villain. You have some narrative that you can pull through, and I think that is a really useful skill set to explain deeply technical things to non-technical people is through storytelling. So what I would recommend is there are generalist non-technical cybersecurity certifications, like we've said, sort of things like CISP and the CompTIA Security Plus and the cyberbullying knowledge and so on. They're really useful to get you the grounding in the what, but the how, which is I think is what the nub of your question is. I actually think it comes out of cyber. It becomes, how do you communicate with people, and how do you get people on a story? I look at how do journalists, how do authors in sort of factual books how do they get a topic over, and finding something that works in your style. Don't copy people just for the sake of copying. It has to work in your style. It has to be natural, because then you can sort of fall into it a lot easier when it becomes naturally part of your style, your approach. So I think that would be probably my guidance. Jules, I don't know if you've got a slightly different.
Yeah, no, very similar, really. I've had a few of my kind of technical team over the years ask me, how can I get out there and start talking about this to a wider audience? I mean, certainly in terms of existing roles, always on the lookout for technical people and making sure that they get the opportunity to do those sorts of presentations to a wider audience. Internally at Sapphire, we've been really keen over the past 6 months of getting collaboration forums internally together, where we get our really in-depth technical specialists to show their work to that wider audience, make sure that they can present it in that easy to understand way, and get feedback on how well they did with those things. I've had a few that have gone through a few kind of leadership and communication courses for technical roles. There are a few online platforms that are offering similar kind of course material to that. That might be a good way for you to learn if that's something that appeals. There's certainly no lack of opportunity out there to dig into some of those things for sure.
The original questions had a follow up, which I think we will do, which is about potentially circulating some of those what training pieces. Again, happy to do that in the follow up. I think there's been a few pieces where we can sort of share some areas that we found useful and as a next step.
100%. Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm just going to go over to Tim's question that's over in the Q&A here as well. So a little bit more of a business question, really. So if you're an organization looking to carry out threat intelligence at a low or an immature level, any recommendations for how you'd approach that? So specifically calling out here that ISO 27001 has got an Annex A clause that specifically calls out the need to involve threat intelligence in a mature cyber organization. So yeah, entry steps to that if you were finding yourself in that position.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I personally would start. I don't know what their role is within the business, but I would start with a view on conducting a sort of an enterprise threat model. Look at your business. How does it operate? What makes that business run? What is valuable to you? What is the revenue? If you're a commercial business, what is the revenue generating parts of your business? what are the critical application systems, locations of your business, and then how could both an attacker attack them and how can you defend them? Because threat intelligence really comes down to knowing what you have and why that could be valuable and how to defend against it. Yes, as you scale in terms of maturity, you can add sticks and taxis feeds, you can add loads of advanced detection capabilities, but it still all falls down to understanding what you protect and understanding how to defend against those threats to that system. So I personally would start at a very, and you can a lot of threat modeling gets applied to an application or a system in sort of design theory concepts, which is completely valid. But you can threat model anything. You can threat model a bus. You can threat model an entire business. You can threat model a country. The concept of and using something like Stride as a framework to do that on. So how can you spoof, tamper, impact, non-repudiation, those types of things? How do you run as a business? How do you then how do you protect those systems? And then look at what industry you're in. So if you're in a particular industry, look at threat intelligence reporting out there from the likes of M-Trends, Mandiant, Verizon. There's lots of industry-based threat reporting. They'll then tell you things that are prevalent in your area. So techniques such as phishing might be more prevalent in one area than another. Insider threat might be more in another area than another. And so understanding how then your threat model adapts to your business. And then as you mature, you can add more complicated and advanced techniques and capabilities to that. But it still, to me, forms the basis of the threat model of your business.
Absolutely. I think a lot of this comes down to time and resources, much like most processes within cybersecurity, doesn't it? If you've got the ability to, identify some helpful feeds of information for you and keep on top of those within, an existing role, fantastic. There should be some good opportunities out there, at least at that initial level of thinking about what equipment do I have, where do I need to look for vulnerability information on those, what sources of free open source information can I get my hands on, just to start going through that process. And once it gets to the point that starts to become overwhelming, then certainly there are organizations out there that you can turn to help provide you with either some more targeted intelligence or monitoring that for you on an ongoing basis. So it's a little bit of, as Gareth said, start with that threat mapping to understand what does that look like, how big a concern do we have at the moment, and responding accordingly.
Agreed. And I think if you add things like vulnerability management, so doing sort of vulnerability scanning of critical information and assets, at looking at implementing a program like Cyber Essentials, which we know for many businesses helps them to get on that maturity improvement journey really well, and helps to protect against claims on cyber insurance and those types of things. As you sort of go on a journey and iterate through, there is lots of ways you can add more, to Jules's point, add more feeds, add more visibility, add more attack surface management and posture management. But it all starts from the basis of knowing what you're trying to protect and spending that time, money, and tooling wisely.
Fantastic.
Okay, so just conscious of time, I've probably only got one or more slide I want to really kind of cover off, and when we can sort of have the rest of the time for questions, really, and that's sort of again with the principle of using security, using Copilot to help me come up with images to have questions of interest. What are some of my lessons learned over my career, and how I use threat intelligence in the past and today. One is breadth and diversity. The ball of string on the left hand side was what AI thought I meant by breadth and diversity, and really that's of the work. And we talked a lot about it here in terms of that day in the life and the types of threat intelligence feeds, but also the people involved. Just by the nature of the questions that we have here, there's different people that touch it in a different way, with different backgrounds, some technical, some non-technical, and I think being aware of that and embracing that as a piece is really important as we look to defend. The world in the middle, geopolitics and how it affects our day-to-day lives from a cyber world. I think you can get lost sometimes in chasing the latest vulnerability or piece of research into technology exploit and miss the geopolitical concept. So I think that's really, really important. And collaboration being the last one. So whether that's between government and public-private sector, whether that's internally between teams, whether that's between different organizations, whether that's through bodies like the Cybersecurity Council, whether that's through collaboration events like B-sides or conferences. Really, collaboration is a critical part in sharing and knowledge. People have different pathways, and actually working together is a really useful way of us tackling the threats. So I guess that's all we kind of really wanted to cover from a content perspective. It's been great that we've had some of these questions come through, but actually totally happy to spend the rest of the time answering any questions that we've not covered or any other ones that have come in.
Yeah, we've got one waiting, and as Gareth said, if you've got any other burning questions ready to go, please do pop them in the chat. We'll make sure we take care of them. But just to start with, a question around trusting the sources of information and trying to understand, when you're looking at a potential source of leaked information, you don't really know where it's come from. How much trust can we put into some of those pieces of threat intel, and how perhaps from an analyst point of view do you go through that process of what data sources to trust?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, again, fabulous question. The challenge that you have, and I think there was a question about whether organizations cite their sources. I think any organization that produces any stat should cite their source, because the cybersecurity world is already bad enough with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, that if we put stats out there that are not cited, then that can only add to that. So I'm a big believer in wherever possible citing sources. I think when you start to get into the slightly murkier world of deep and dark web breaches, we have seen misinformation and disinformation activities when it comes to that. I think understanding whether, if it's a set of breached username and credentials, whether actually you can verify that through a secondary source. Can you use secondary sourcing to not just react to the one source that you have, but see whether, as an example, does a leaked set of username and passwords actually comply with your password policy in your business? Because if it doesn't, then it might be munged from other sources. It might be made up. It might be whatever. It's a slightly flippant example, but if there is reference to technology that you don't use within your business in a set of credential leaks, because it's some private keys to an AWS environment or something in your coding repository, but you code entirely in Azure, then actually context to your business is quite a useful way of doing it. Now, I would say that then going back to your risk posture, it comes down to how important do you put the information that's potentially in that source to you as your business in your risk posture. If it's for maybe a lower risk environment, then maybe you trust it less because you want to find a secondary source to validate it. Maybe if it's a really critical thing, then maybe you react slightly more protective of your business and try and give it a certain degree of assurance. You got to remember that breaches will happen. Threats will happen out there. We see in ransomware attacks, calls for ransom that are, give me money for the release of this, and actually disinformation through that, confusion through that process can be part of the actor's tradecraft. So what I'd encourage you to is to identify as best you can any secondary sourcing of that information. If it is of critical information, look to look to react appropriately to your incident response playbook that you built in the business. So what should happen when when you've decided when you built your incident response playbook, what should you do if there is information breached? Is there a mass password reset policy? Is it a mass MFA challenge policy? What is your next step? Because you can't overreact if it's critical to your business. You've got to obviously keep your business running, but protection being important. So hopefully that answers the question. It's hard, I guess, would be my summary from that. This is a slightly challenging world, and so you need to look at as many ways as possible to give you certainty on that.
Thanks, Gareth. I think I always find it fascinating when you move into, as you say, the kind of dark web side of things, and looking at the activities of kind of cyber criminals and whether that's relevant to what you're doing in your role. That trust plays such an important part within, those anonymous networks of people doing nefarious things, just as much as it does in our day-to-day lives. We're constantly needing to evaluate that information and understand, can you trust that source? And to a certain extent, they need you to be able to do the same. If their business is to go out there and sell, leaked information, then they want to make sure that you trust that they can provide it. You want to pay for it. So it's a fascinating world of sociology, if nothing else. I don't think I've seen any more questions come in. If there are any, feel free to jump in with those now. I believe we've just popped a little feedback poll up on there as well. If you wouldn't mind filling that in for us, that would be very, very much appreciated. But yeah, I mean, Gareth, any final thoughts? Anything that you wanted to cover off? Is there anything that you've seen recently out there in the news? Anything you've read that's been quite interesting? Anything that, comes to mind?
Yeah, no, I firstly, thank you for everyone's time. Hopefully, we covered some information that was useful to you. In terms of my own kind of reading in the last sort of 24, 40 hours or so, a few things of interest around. There was a security vulnerability released by VMware about vCenter, which was two or more critical vulnerabilities around remote code execution within their environment. So thinking about that being quite a technical feed, but what does that mean for translating that into a business? There's those pieces. Also, some fairly positive news around the crackdown of cyber criminals. So the purported leader of the Scattered Spider group, who have targeted MGM and Caesar Entertainments in the US, was arrested yesterday, I think, in Spain. So again, you add that to the sort of lockbit world of sort of disrupting these groups. Again, from a threat intelligence perspective, on one hand, really positive. But on the other hand, does that mean that the sort of tradecraft changes? Because as you disrupt one group over here, another group pops up and tries to fill their space in typical kind of crime world. So as a constantly changing world, it's quite interesting. So yeah, those are a couple of highlights for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gareth, and thank you to the Cybersecurity Council for having both of us here today to hopefully share some interesting nuggets of information with you all. We'll send around a bit of a follow-up email in the coming days, but thank you so much to everybody for attending and being with us here today, and for anybody who's watching this on demand. Feel free to reach out to Gareth and I. You'll find us on LinkedIn and all those good places if you've got further questions. And hopefully we'll speak to you soon. Have a wonderful career in cyber threat intelligence.
Everyone.